They tore up her badge, called her a fraud. Minutes later, she ended the entire board. Have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt like you didn't belong? Like every pair of eyes was a tiny judgment, and every whisper was about you? That's the feeling that should have filled the lobby of Ethereum Technologies that morning. It was a temple of glass and steel, a place where the air smelled like expensive coffee and ambition. The floors were so polished you could see your own reflection looking back up at you, a tiny, uncertain figure in a vast, cold space. People moved through it with a purpose, their postures straight, their voices low and important. This was a place where you had to prove you deserved to be there. And into this world walked a woman named Aaliyah Vance. Now, if you saw her, you might not have known what to think. She wasn't dressed to intimidate. She wore a simple, elegant blazer the color of a coral sunset. She carried one slim folder. No entourage, no loud phone calls, no look of arrogant entitlement. But if you looked closer, you'd see it. There was a stillness to her, a calmness in her eyes. She walked through that gleaming lobby not like she was trying to own it, but like she already did. And that quiet confidence, it can be a threat to people who build their power on being loud. The first person to sense that threat was a security guard named Marcus Boone. He was a man who wore his authority like a suit of armor, and he spotted her the moment she stepped off the marble entranceway. His eyes narrowed. He didn't see her calmness. He saw a problem. He stepped directly into her path, his boots clicking firmly on the floor. "ID now," he barked. His voice wasn't just a request. It was a command, a test. Aaliyah paused. She didn't flinch. She didn't look nervous. She just met his gaze, her voice level and polite. "I'm here for the board meeting." Marcus's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Board meeting?" he said, letting the words hang in the air, dripping with disbelief. "Not for you. People like you wait outside. Did you hear that? People like you. We've all heard a version of that phrase, haven't we? It's meant to shrink you, to put you in your place." And then he did something that made my breath catch. He reached out and clamped his hand around her arm, right on the sleeve of that beautiful coral blazer. He squeezed, harder than he needed to. It was a physical message. Asterisk, I control you. I decide where you go. Asterisk. A few people nearby gasped. Phones, which were always out in that place, tilted up just a little higher. This was better than the morning coffee run. This was drama. From behind the giant reception desk, a woman named Chloe Petrov watched with a smirk. She was the gatekeeper, and she loved the sound of her own voice echoing in the big space. "HR's downstairs, sweetie," she called out, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe you're lost." A couple of interns by the elevator snickered. The laughter was like a tiny knife. It's designed to humiliate, to make you feel small and foolish. But Aaliyah didn't move. She didn't argue. She didn't try to pull her arm away. She just stood there, in the middle of it all, silent. Her silence was her shield. It was the strongest, most powerful thing in that room. But Marcus, he mistook that silence for weakness. "Don't play games with me," he said, his voice getting lower, angrier. "Show me your ID before I drag you out of here myself." The crowd of employees was shifting now, feeling uncomfortable. This was getting ugly. A young staffer, leaning against a pillar, whispered to his friend, "She doesn't look lost." He held his phone up, its camera lens pointed right at them, a tiny red light glowing. He was recording it all. And then, the main event arrived. A man came storming out of the elevator bank. David Sterling. You know the type. His tie was too sharp, his suit was too expensive, and his confidence was as brittle as thin ice. He heard the commotion and saw a chance to be the big man, to show everyone who was in charge. His voice cut through the murmurs like a gavel striking a desk. "Executives don't stand in lobbies," he announced to the room, as if announcing a universal law. He looked Aaliyah up and down, not seeing a person, seeing an inconvenience. "Whoever you are, you're holding up real business." He walked right up to her, and then he did the most shocking thing. He reached out, and with a quick, violent motion, he ripped the visitor's badge right off her lapel. The sound of the clip snapping seemed incredibly loud in the quiet lobby. He slapped the badge down on the reception counter so hard it bounced and skittered across the floor, coming to rest near a potted plant. A few people actually gasped. He leaned in, sneering. "Another fraud." The word landed like a punch. "Fraud!" From behind her desk, Chloe Petrov folded her arms, her smirk widening. "Security's on the way. You've got 5 seconds before you're removed." Marcus, emboldened by his boss, leaned in closer to Aaliyah, his breath hot on her face. He was trying to humiliate her, to break that infuriating calm. "This isn't your space. Do yourself a favor and walk out." But Aaliyah's stillness just grew deeper. Her eyes were locked forward, unblinking. She was a rock in the middle of their raging river, and it was starting to unsettle them. Resistance they could handle, but this silence? It was unnerving. From the back of the crowd, someone muttered, loud enough to be heard. "If she were white, she'd already be upstairs." The air changed. The mood shifted. David Sterling picked up the broken pieces of the badge from the floor and, with a dramatic flourish, dropped them into the trash can. "You're finished here," he declared. And in the heavy silence that followed, the only sound was the quiet whir of phone cameras recording every single second. Then a voice cracked. It was the young staffer by the pillar, his voice trembling but clear. "I saw her name on the schedule this morning." David Sterling's head snapped around. "Excuse me?" The young man swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. He steadied himself. "I checked the system. Graves. Executive clearance. Boardroom access." A buzz went through the crowd. Chloe's smirk finally faltered. Marcus's grip on Aaliyah's arm loosened, just a fraction. But David Sterling scoffed, trying to bulldoze over the doubt. A fresh hire doesn't know protocol. But the murmurs were spreading now, faster than his denial. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore. They were questioning. And in the middle of it all, Aaliyah Vance finally moved. Her hand slid slowly, calmly, into her pocket. She pulled out her phone. She didn't look at David, or Marcus, or Chloe. She just lifted it to her ear, and she spoke 2 words into the silence. "Activate protocol." A clear, digital voice answered from the speaker, audible in the stunned quiet of the lobby. "Protocol engaged. All access logged. Corporate notified." Every phone in that lobby was now tilted higher, live streams glowing. Someone whispered, "That's real." David Sterling's face began to pale. His authority, so loud and solid just moments before, was thinning, evaporating into the air. "You think calling someone changes anything?" he blustered, a desperate, last-ditch effort. Aaliyah lowered the phone slowly. She looked at him, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Something fierce. "It changes everything," she said. And in that moment, we were all left hanging, our hearts in our throats. The guard was unsure, the receptionist was scared, the manager was crumbling. The silent woman had finally spoken, and we had no idea just how much everything was about to change. So there we were. The air in that lobby was so thick you could barely breathe. It was charged with something electric, something about to break. Just moments before, this woman, Aaliyah, had been surrounded, accused, and humiliated. The security guard, Marcus, had his hand on her. The manager, David Sterling, had torn her badge off and thrown it in the trash. They called her a fraud. They thought they had won. They thought their loud voices and their cheap authority had silenced her for good. But then she spoke those two quiet words into her phone. "Activate protocol." And a voice answered back, for everyone to hear. Protocol engaged. Everything shifted. It was like a spell had been broken. The smirk was gone from Chloe, the receptionist's face. Marcus the guard had let go of Aaliyah's arm completely now, taking a full step back, his eyes wide and confused. He was just a man in a uniform again, not a wielder of power. And David Sterling? His face had gone pale. You could see the gears turning in his head, the panic starting to set in. But he was in too deep. His pride was a trap he'd built for himself. He had to double down. "You think calling someone changes anything?" he shouted. His voice didn't sound powerful anymore. It sounded desperate. It sounded scared. It was the bluster of a man who knows, deep down, that the ground is crumbling beneath his feet. And Aaliyah? She lowered her phone. She looked right at him, and her voice was calm, but it was like a knife. So sharp and so clear. "It changes everything." For a second, nobody moved. And then, from the crowd, a voice called out, "Prove she's lying. Pull up the system." It was the young staffer again, finding his courage. He was holding his phone high, live streaming everything. Another person, a visitor maybe, joined in. "Yeah, who do you even answer to?" The crowd, which had been a silent audience, was now finding its voice. They were becoming jurors in a trial that David Sterling never agreed to. The phones weren't just recording anymore. They were bearing witness. They were holding him accountable. David Sterling was sweating. He was trying to stare them down, to be the big boss again, but his foundation was made of sand. "I don't answer to random onlookers," he sputtered. And that's when Elijah Vance decided the game was over. She looked at David, then at Chloe, then at Marcus. She saw the history of every person they had ever pushed down, every person they had ever made to feel small in this lobby. And she knew it ended now. She slowly lifted her phone back to her ear. The entire lobby was silent, waiting for her next words. You could have heard a pin drop on that expensive marble floor. She spoke 3 words. Just 3. Initiate termination. Lock credentials. And then, we heard it. That same calm, digital voice from her phone speaker, echoing in the silence. Confirmed. Board access revoked. And then it started. Beep. Chloe Petrov's access badge, clipped to her blouse, suddenly blinked from a soft green to a harsh, glaring red. She looked down at it, her eyes wide with horror. She was locked out. KSSSHHHHH. Marcus's radio on his shoulder erupted into a burst of static, and then went dead silent. He fumbled with it, pressing buttons, but it was just a useless piece of plastic on his shoulder. His authority was gone. Flicker. David Sterling's expensive tablet, which he was clutching like a lifeline, suddenly went dark. The screen turned black. He tapped it frantically. Nothing. He was looking at his own reflection in the dead glass. It was over. In less than 10 seconds, without a single raised voice, she had ended them. The lobby erupted. Someone shouted. She just fired them. On the spot. People were clapping. They were cheering. It was a roar of approval, a wave of cathartic justice that washed through the entire building. After all the bullying, all the arrogance, it was finally here. David Sterling's face completely collapsed. The anger was gone, replaced by pure, raw desperation. This isn't legal, he stammered, his voice hollow. And that's when Aaliyah gave them the truth. The truth that explained her silence, her patience, her power. She took a step forward, and her voice, for the first time, filled the space not with volume, but with immense gravity. "What's not legal," she said, her words measured and precise, "is profiling the owner of this company, tearing her badge, calling her a fraud in her own lobby." The word hung in the air. Owner. Silence. A deep, profound, amazing silence. The woman they tried to throw out was the person who owned every single tile of marble beneath their feet. The person who signed their paychecks. The person whose name was on the building. She wasn't just their boss. She was the source. And they had tried to erase her. "This company deserves better," Aaliyah declared, her gaze sweeping over the entire crowd. She was speaking to everyone now. And starting today, it will have better. The applause swelled again, louder this time. It was relentless. It was undeniable. And we watched them unravel. David Sterling just deflated. He stumbled back and slumped into a lobby chair, hollowed out, a puppet with its strings cut. Chloe Petrov was trembling behind her desk, staring at that blinking red badge on her chest like it was a scarlet letter. Marcus Boone just leaned against the wall, looking at the floor, no longer a guard, just a man who had been utterly, completely wrong. The crowd parted. It was like the sea opening up, and Aaliyah Vance finally walked toward the elevators. Her heels clicked on the marble, each step a final, satisfying period at the end of a sentence. She didn't look triumphant. She just looked resolved. She reached the elevator, and the door slid open with a gentle chime. But she turned around one last time. She looked at all of us. The people who had watched, who had recorded, who had finally spoken up. And she said something I will never forget. She said, "They thought silence was weakness." She paused, letting us feel the weight of that. But silence is just power, waiting for the right moment. And with that, she stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, and she was gone. She left behind a lobby that was forever changed. She left behind 3 people who had just learned a devastating lesson about respect. And she left behind a story that I think we all needed to hear. A story that reminds us that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. That dignity isn't something you can tear off someone's lapel. And that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to say nothing at all. Until the exact right moment, when your silence speaks louder than any shout ever could. If this story shook you, if it reminded you of a time you were made to feel small, don't just hold on to that feeling. Let it remind you of your own power. Share this story. Talk about it. Because your voice, your quiet, steady voice, matters more than you know.